Would you turn again, please, to 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 1 to 11. Again, there's a page number on the pink sheet if you've got a church Bible. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 1 to 11. When I was a student many years ago, when I did my shopping and it came to buying milk, to save money, I would buy Tesco Value. Do you remember those blue and white stripes that were on everything? Tesco Value, fully skimmed UHT long life milk. That's what I would buy. It was very cheap and you could buy a lot of it in bulk to get it even cheaper. That's what I'd buy. That's what I would have on my breakfast cereal. And I was okay with that. Until one day, I tasted proper, out of a cow, fresh, full-fat milk. And then I didn't want to taste that UHT rubbish again. Once I tasted the real thing, it put me off that, what was really just white water that I was cheaply buying. Now, 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 1 to 11 is doing something similar. What it's doing is this, it's saying, get a taste for the new covenant so you don't go after imitations. That's what this passage is doing. Get a taste for the new covenant so you don't go after those watered down UHT imitations. I better explain what I mean by new covenant. God makes covenants with humans. That is, he makes solemn promises. Not just to do things, he does promise to do things, but it's more than that. They are binding agreements where he binds himself into relationship with humans. He did so many times in the Old Testament. The biggest one maybe is a covenant with Israel as his chosen people. But now in the New Testament, there is a new covenant. And our passage, 2 Corinthians 3, first 11 verses, is about this new covenant. We're doing a series going through 2 Corinthians. We've been in it for 4 weeks so far, and we've heard that new teachers had come to this city of Corinth, and they were outwardly impressive. And the Corinthians were impressed because they liked showy, grand things. But these were false teachers. And they were in danger of dragging the Corinthians back into the old covenant. And that's why they're given a taste for the new covenant so they won't be satisfied with imitations. We are not in exactly the same situation as the Corinthians, but we do have some big similarities. And so let's get a taste for the new covenant so we won't be satisfied with pale imitations. 3 things the new covenant gives. It gives more, but there are 3 things in this passage. We're going to just go through them in order. Here's the first one. The new covenant gives inward change, not outward show. This is verses 1 to 3. Inward change, not outward show. These new teachers turned up in Corinth with letters of recommendation. Do you see that in verse 1? They've got letters of recommendation. Maybe it's from their workplace. Maybe it's from a previous church they've been at. Maybe it's something like this. Lucius is a natural leader. He's a highly capable man with a PhD in theology, and we all love his preaching. You ought to accept him. Maybe something like that. Paul had a quite different type of letter. Do you see it in verse 2? His letter is real live humans, the Corinthians themselves. And he says in verse 3, they were written not with dead ink, but with the Spirit of the living God. And they were written not on stone, but on human hearts. Now, what did he mean? I doubt those people coming into Corinth with letters of recommendation had them written on stone. So why does he say not written on stone but on hearts? Not written with dead ink but the Spirit of the living God? What did he mean? This is why we read earlier Jeremiah 31. Do you remember it? It said a new covenant is coming. When God will write his law, instead of on stone, what could he have meant on stone? The Ten Commandments. Instead of on stone, on human hearts. How would God write his law on human hearts? With what would God write? Ink would be no good. This is why we read Ezekiel 36. It's very much parallel to Jeremiah 31. And it says, God will give his spirit to work in human hearts. So we don't just have the law on stone saying, don't do this. We have God having changed our desire, so we want to obey him. Now, Paul's language in verse 3, it's verse 3 that I'm up to now, is clearly taking the words of Jeremiah 31 and Ezekiel 36. Paul clearly has those passages in mind. And he is saying that new covenant has now come. What Jeremiah and Ezekiel prophesied has happened. And you, Corinthians, you're the evidence for it. You are my letter of recommendation because the change in your life is evidence the new covenant has come. You've turned from idols to serve the living and true God. You've turned from, no, God, I'm in charge, I'm not going to obey you, to, I actually want to live God's way. That's evidence the new covenant has come. The Corinthians are themselves Paul's letter of recommendation. But who are they a letter from? Do you see in verse 3? Who are they a letter from? Christ. Why? Because Jesus Christ brought in the new covenant. Across the old covenant, every covenant was sealed with blood. Always an animal was killed and blood was used to show there's a new covenant. There is a covenant being made. But what do we hear every time we take the Lord's Supper, every time we have communion here? Do you remember? We hear these words. Jesus said, this cup is the, you know what? New covenant sealed in my blood. By his death, he has made a new covenant between humans and God. Okay, I've explained to you verses 1 to 3. How does it apply to us? I am not aware of many people saying, look, I'm a Christian because I've got a letter of recommendation. Although I have come across people saying I'm a Christian because I've got a baptism certificate. I'm not aware of many people saying I ought to be the church's leader because I've got a letter of recommendation. But I am aware of how easily we rely on outward show. Like a letter of recommendation, outward show. I must be a Christian because look at all the church activities I'm involved in. I must be a good Christian because I feel so at home here. I really like coming. This person must be a great man of God because he is a highly regarded preacher at all the right conferences. Not quite letters of recommendation, but very close, relying on outward show. We do it so easily. Here's a little parallel. I'm told that upper class people have a circuit of events they want to be seen at. They go to the races at Ascot, to Henley Royal Regatta. I must admit, I don't know any others, because you might be surprised I don't go to them, but I'm sure there are more, and they're the places to be seen, and then you're an accepted person. Well, we can have our church equivalents. Conferences, Christian events, meetings where if you are well known at them, if you're well networked at them, well, you must be a right person. No, God in 2 Corinthians 3 is saying the new covenant is evidenced by heart change, not by outward show or being well connected in the right circles. It's a matter of hearts changed by Jesus. This is relevant to us as individuals, but also to us as a church, Holywell. Does Holywell being full of people mean that we are in a healthy state as a church? Not necessarily. We may be. I'm not saying we're not, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. Again, let's have a parallel. Leicester Royal Infirmary, Leicester General, and Glenfield pass through their doors each year. And Leicester Royal A&E has up to go through A&E there. Does that mean they are successful hospitals? Does that in itself tell? No, the aim of a hospital isn't numbers of people in, it's numbers. And it's very similar for a church. The test of us isn't how many people come, it is our hearts being changed, our lives being changed, our people turning from sin to follow Jesus. We mustn't be satisfied with the outward. We must be looking for inward change. Are you satisfied with outward show? As long as you turn up to church and you feel happy here, as long as other people think you're a good person, are you happy with that? Will you allow patterns of sin to continue unchecked as long as other people, well, think you've got a good reputation? Or is your concern for heart change? Do you check yourself for a sin and turn from it, even if it's hidden from others? Are you, in the words of verse 3, a letter from Christ? Isn't that a wonderful description of a Christian? A Christian is a letter from Christ. The Spirit, heart, if I'm allowed to borrow some computer language, is desire. Is that what you long for? Will you ask God for that? He's ready to hear prayers like that and to give that heart change. The new covenant is a matter of inward change, not outward show. But secondly, the new covenant gives the Spirit's power, not weak words. We move on to verses. If you were here last week, you might remember we 6, because they connect back to chapter 2 to show it's God who had equipped Paul to be a. This morning is in verse 6 it says God had equipped Paul to be a minister of the new covenant. And what was that new covenant characterized by? Verse 6, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. You might recognize there's a bit of a play on the word letter here. Now he's not meaning a letter of recommendation. He's looking back to verse 3. Verse 3, those letters that were written on stone. Children, I hope you're listening, children. What were the letters written on stone? Do you remember? The 10 Commandments. Were they good letters? Yes, they were good letters. You shall have no other gods before me. That's good. You shall not covet. That's good. They were good letters. But did those letters have power to make people different, to change lives? No. Let's have another parallel. Tara has a book on running the 110-metre hurdles. This book tells her the history of hurdle running. It tells her training techniques for hurdle running. It gives her a program of how she can train for it. She reads the book. She remembers what it says. She understands it. She turns it over in her mind. Does that make Tara an Olympic hurdler? No, it doesn't, does it? However good the book is, it doesn't make her an Olympic athlete. She needs more than letters telling her. She needs power inside her. Those Old Testament letters written on stone were good, but we need more. We need power inside us. In fact, we can go further. The words of the Old Covenant on their own are not only powerless, they bring death. They bring death. See verse. The words of the gospel on their gospel. We saw this last week, chapter 2, verse 16. The message The new covenant gives the Spirit's power, not weak words. And then lastly, and possibly most importantly, the new covenant gives righteousness and life, not condemnation and death. Now we're in verse 7 to 11. Righteousness and life, not condemnation and death. I'm going to start verse 7 with an illustration which I think parallels it. Susan is a little girl looking up into the sky, and what she sees there really impresses her. Wow, she just stands and watches. It's really grand. Do you know what she's watching? The sky is full of aeroplanes. Hundreds of them flying in formation. They look really grand, and she is really impressed. But Susan mustn't stand there watching them. Do you know why? It's 1941, and she's in London, and those planes have little black crosses on them, and soon they're going to be dropping bombs out of them. They are grand, but they bring death. And verse 7 says, the old covenant law is like that. It had a glory. Can you imagine Moses coming down from Mount Sinai, carrying 2 tablets of stone, smoke billowing up off the mountain, the people being told, don't come near? It was impressive. But it brought death. Death. Why did it bring death? Verse 9. Verse 9 says, because it condemns. It condemns us. That covenant said, you shall have no other gods before me. But you've put other things before God so many times. I know you have, because I have also, and we're all like it, condemned. It says, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. But you've prayed thoughtlessly, as if talking to a nobody. At least I expect you have, because I know I've done it so many times. We're condemned. It says, you shall not covet. But you've been dissatisfied with what God has given you and grumbled about it. And thought, if only I could have that thing that God isn't giving me. I expect you have, because I know I have. We're condemned. It was a glorious covenant, but it brought death, because it just condemned us. Does that mean God's law is bad? No, it's not the law is bad. I'm going to reuse an illustration I've used several times before. Abdul is going out for a smart meal. Before he goes out, he looks in the mirror. And what does he see? Oh dear, there's dirt on his face. So what does he do? The mirror has shown up the dirt. What does he do? He leans over and he rubs his face on the mirror to rub off the dirt. Is that very sensible? And this is where my story will get far-fetched. As he rubs his face on the mirror, it's got a sharp corner and it slits his neck and he dies. Sorry, that was unpredictably unpleasant, but that's my illustration. Does that mean that the mirrors are bad things? No. The mirror is good for showing up dirt, but it's not meant to clean your face. It's meant to get you going to the soap and water, so that will clean your face. God's law is like the mirror. It won't make you clean. Try to get yourself clean with it, and you'll end up killing yourself like Abdul slitting his neck on it. But it is good for showing up to us our sin, so we go to the soap and water. It's a very unusual soap and water. It's the blood of Jesus, God's Son, cleanses us from all sin. That is, I'm trying to summarize to you verses 7 to 11. Let's just have a look at a couple of things there. Can you see the contrast in these verses? The old covenant law condemns us. Do you see verse 9? The old covenant law condemns us. But the new covenant of Jesus does the opposite. What? Verse 9? It brings us righteousness. Instead of just saying don't do, it says Jesus has done. And all of his perfect obedience can be counted to you. Won't you just trust him for it? Do you see the opposite? The law condemns, The new covenant of Jesus says Jesus has done it in your place. His rightness, his perfect goodness can be counted to you. Here's another contrast. The old covenant law, verse 7, brings what? It brings death. But the new covenant of Jesus brings the opposite. What's the opposite? Life, you'd think, but it's not quite what it says. Verse 8, it says the new covenant brings the Spirit. Because the Spirit is the life giver. He has been ever since Genesis 1 verse 2. Maybe later you can flick to Genesis 1 verse 2 and see. Ever since creation, the Spirit has been the life giver. And he can work in you life as God meant it to be. Life forever. How does this apply to us? We have the soap and water. Don't go back to rubbing your face on the mirror. In other words, we have Jesus who cleanses us from sin. Don't go back to using the law as if you can make yourself right enough for God, as if that can cleanse you. Now, for them, that meant going back to Judaism. They were in danger of going back to a twisted version of Old Testament Judaism. I am not aware of many people today turning from Christianity to Judaism. There may be some, but I'm not aware of many. But I am aware that quite a lot are turning to imitations of Christianity that are like rubbing your face on the mirror, because they are religions of making yourself good enough for God by obeying the rules. I'll give you 2 examples, maybe 3 actually. A friend of mine is a minister in Yorkshire. And last time I saw him, I said, "Do you have much fellowship with other Christians in your town? Are there other good evangelical churches?" He said, "A strange thing has happened in my town. There was an evangelical church and a minister I thought was preaching the gospel, and we got on well. Do you know what he's done? He has turned to being Russian Orthodox. And he's changed his church from evangelical to Russian Orthodox. Very strange thing. But here's my second example. John Stevens is the head of what's called the FIEC. It's a big organisation of churches. And a few years ago, he said the Roman Catholic Church is going to be one of the big dangers of the future, in his view, because our society has a lack of moral foundation. And it has a lack of historical rootedness. And it has a lack of sense of the majesty of God. And the Roman Catholics look like they've got that. So, because people want those sorts of things, there's a danger they're going to turn to Roman Catholicism will give it. Do you know, he's proved right. There are now actually quite a lot of people turning to Catholic and Orthodox versions of Christianity. And they are like rubbing your face on the mirror, because they are imitations of Christianity that get you trusting in how well you keep the religious rules, how well you do the activities the priest tells you. It's just like rubbing your face on the mirror, and it's likely to slit your neck and kill you. But it's not just out there. It's not just in a church with a notice board that says Catholic or Orthodox. It's so easily in here, in each of us. I know it's in me. We so easily fall into thinking God accepts me or doesn't on the basis of how well I'm doing at the moment. Oh, I've been reading my Bible well recently. God must be pleased with me. Oh, I've not been reading the Bible very well. God must be displeased with me. Maybe he doesn't love me anymore. How am I doing in the fight against sin? Now, we must ask ourselves that question, but it mustn't become the basis for whether we're right with God or out of favour with God. We so easily slip back into rules-based religion. But we've got something so much better. We've got the glorious new covenant where Jesus counts his righteousness to us not depending on what we do. And Jesus gives his Spirit to us, not depending on our ability. The new covenant gives, what was it? Inward change, not outward show. The Spirit's power, not weak words. Righteousness and life, not condemnation and death. Have you drunk the full fat milk of the gospel? Are you satisfied with, have you appreciated the full fat whole milk of the new covenant of Jesus? So you won't drink, you will not be satisfied with the skimmed UHT stuff of outward show or weak words or religion based on what we manage. In the new covenant, in Jesus, we have so much better. In the words of verse 11, we have much greater glory that lasts beyond death and through eternity. Let's sing a hymn of celebration of that new covenant. We're going to sing a hymn in which in verses 1 to 3 we sing, Jesus has done it all. In verse 4 we sing, the Spirit brings new life. And in verse 5 we